Hello and welcome. This is COVID-19 and its lasting effects on educational reform. I'm Melinda Bailey, and we also have Raquel Carley, Lillian Rodrigue, and Catherine White in our group.
Okay, so just kind of as a quick introduction, the COVID-19 pandemic pretty much changed the world of education. All of a sudden, we had students who were kind of being forced into a mandatory quarantine, and teachers who were basically being asked to step up and do their jobs, take what we kind of traditionally do within the classroom in a face-to-face setting, and immediately transition it to where it becomes technology-based. And so this was a huge shift worldwide, starting in one piece and kind of moving across. This isn't something that just focused in the United States. And we've seen that specifically when we look at the World Economic Forum, who cited that 1.2 billion children in 186 countries were affected by school closures. And so this became a major challenge where the traditional classroom, which was teacher driven with the teacher at the center, has now had to kind of shift to be replaced by student-centered learning. But also it's kind of created this environment where we're starting to recognize the whole student and the importance of the hierarchy of needs for each of these students in particular. So one of the first things that we were kind of tasked to look into is the new normal. And probably the biggest thing that we had seen was the shift to virtual learning. For many teachers, and this goes K-12 all the way up to the collegiate setting, a lot of it had to do with kind of being able to reach out to students one-on-one. We are very much used to the natural kind of face-to-face interactions. And so in order to compensate for that, there was a major shift into online video conferencing. This is where you look into your Zooms and your Google Meets and your Microsoft Teams. But I think kind of one of the biggest things to recognize is that teachers were kind of tasked with being able to meet students and also recognize the different demographic needs for each of these students. So that kind of became a driving force in that shift to new normal, was teachers selecting online platforms if possible, to be able to best suit the needs of their learners. And at its core, teaching is about relationships. So I think that became a massive shift, is now in recognizing that students are at home and they are not in the classroom, or at least in the traditional setting. It's how do we bring learning into the home? How do we still maintain those connections? And so that online video conferencing has really been a major factor and creating this synchronous learning environment that allows them to learn in real time with either some of the classmates who may be in the classroom or at home in a full online environment. A second driving force has been those learning management systems in the virtual setting. These are your Google Classrooms. This is your Canvas, your Moodle. Actually, on weforum.org, it cited that there has been a 200% increase in the number of students who are using these online services. And a lot of it cites the fact that in some cases they're easy to use. So something like Google Classroom is fairly familiar, but also it almost becomes a digital binder, which allows teachers and students to stay organized. Students are able to participate in online discussions, but it also maintains anonymity for students as well. So in these learning management systems, the teacher still is able to control that environment, and students are kind of able to openly participate. And one of the final shifts to the new normal, which I'm personally a big fan of, is this idea of student learning flexibility. And many of the articles of research, it was talking about how a lot of people assume that asynchronous learning is strictly collegiate, and that people often associate virtual learning with just a strict college setting. But what's ended up happening is now we're seeing that there's a way to offer this to all students, and that it's this ability for students to be able to work at their own pace. There was also an article that cited the fact that in some cases, with young students in particular, because they are so reliant on their parents, and we have parents of low-income families who do not have flexible working hours, that the asynchronous method is most productive for them in particular, because if the student is unable to participate in real time, they can always go back and they can kind of watch these videos and work at their own pace, which is allowing a retention of 60% more learning. So it's been incredibly productive in its shift to the online method. So one of the key takeaways that I took from the new normal section was talking about Youki Terada. And basically in his article, he talked about he groups digital learning practices into 3 key sections, and it was substitution, augmentation, and modification. And what he goes on to talk about in his article is the fact that when COVID-19 began, teachers had to approach virtual learning how they understood it. So this isn't something that you've got people who have been through these training processes. It was just kind of thrust upon teachers, and they had to do what they could to best meet the needs of those students. So in this case, he says that substitution is basically when you take what would be traditionally done in the classroom and you just transition it into a digital format. So these are your teachers who took their their basic worksheets and they uploaded them to Google Classroom. That's the substitution. It's the idea of you're on that side, I'm on this side, so I'm going to give you the same thing. And in the article, he talks about how in most cases, a lot of teachers, especially teachers who weren't familiar with the technology, that was kind of the go-to solution. Is they said, we'll use the substitution, we just need to get to work to the students. But he says on the next step with augmentation, these are teachers who are starting to recognize how to integrate the technology. They use it to enhance the lesson. It's still not considered fully immersive. So rather than giving a quiz to students, maybe you'll do it on Kahoots, or rather than having them have a class discussion, you would open up back channeling, which would allow them to kind of chat back and forth. So this is incorporating technology into the lesson, but not necessarily changing everything, versus modification, which is key. And modification is where we really start to see those students become interactive and participate. We all know that one of the key takeaways has been that we cannot have passive learners, that our students in these settings cannot just be talked at, they have to be able to actively participate. And so he said modification is where you really are able to change the curriculum to suit the needs of those learners and ask them to become active participants. Also, one of the big takeaways was that in 2019, the US invested $18.66 billion in educational technology. However, researchers are predicting that there will be $350 billion in educational technology by 2025. And again, this goes back to this massive 200% increase in online use, which has been kind of the big shift with COVID-19.
So some of the challenges that teachers, students, everybody doing our distance education go through, the first one is undertrained educators. So teachers need months of in-depth training and practice on making online instruction engaging. Most teachers receive days of training before the school started. So teachers are not getting enough training for them to fully integrate the technology as the modification step, as just previously talked about. Also, they are just getting thrown in 2 days before and having like 1 day of training and then say, oh, you have to go do it yourself. No, you need months of training to fully be creating engaged lessons. It takes time and it's hard online, and teachers don't have time to create those engaging lessons without the proper training that we need. The next one is, I just talked about the next one, creating engaging lessons. We need time and we need training to create our engaging lessons so our students can comprehend and understand the content that they need to learn. Building connections with students is another challenge that many educators are facing. Because socialization is critical to a child's development, therefore we must adapt so that our students can find new ways to socialize through distance learning. We're talking to each other over a computer. There's not much socializing we can do because they need to stay on mute while the teacher is instructing because of the background noise. They have dogs barking, babies crying. There's not much they can interact with each other. We need to find a way where they can build connections so they can really engage with each other, have that socialization skill still, and they can really interact with the content while engaging with their classmates. And the last one would be the digital divide. So Block 2020 defines digital divide as a gap in access to technology by socioeconomic status, race, or gender. But it's not only race, gender, or the socioeconomic status. It's also the access to high quality internet connection. A lot of the times my students are say they can't hear me, or I am glitching, or I am lagging, and it just affects the whole lesson because their internet is not well. And another one for the digital divide is students don't have access to technology. My students had to come get a Chromebook from us. Our Chromebooks are 10 years old, 5 years old. They are not the best, and they know they're not the best because of how much it lags. Whether that's the internet or the computer, it's both play a role in that. And with the digital divide, we have those low socioeconomic status students who are really falling behind because of it. Yeah.
Okay, so some of the emerging best practices, teachers have only been able to teach through the pandemic since March. Some schools have been hybrid, some schools have been completely virtual, some schools have gone back to entirely face-to-face. So there's still a lot of research being done to figure out what the best practices are in the midst of teaching during a pandemic. But here are some ideas. One article cites bicronous learning. So instead of just having asynchronous and synchronous learning separately, they're finding that students become more engaged in online classes if they have both options. So they can work alone at their own pace, but then they also come together and collaborate as a whole group in some form or fashion. So bicronous online learning is defined by Martin et al. As the blending of both asynchronous and synchronous online learning, where students can participate in any time, anywhere learning during the asynchronous parts of the course, but then participate in real-time activities for synchronous sessions. So this allows students to build that relationship with the instructor and also build relationships with their other classmates. Another need, a huge need, is instructional training for educators. In Hausman's article, he recommends that, I'm skipping ahead, sorry, but he recommends that districts start small. Teachers need training on how to implement technology into their lessons, or it'll be very similar to what Katie cited about how teachers just how teachers just make a virtual worksheet. So teachers need instructional training for educators. Administrators, districts all need training for what good learning looks like digitally or virtually. Technical support is also needed for educators, students, and parents, for all stakeholders of the community, so that everyone has access to technology, everyone has working technology, but also parents are becoming more and more concerned about the technology that their students are using because their student is on a device almost the entire day. So parents also need training to know what to look for when their student is using a new program that they don't know, or accessing sites they might not want them to access. Hausman recommends to start simple. Don't overwhelm your district or your teachers with multiple tools. Just pick one and run with it. And also don't make students use technology that they're unfamiliar with. It's going to take some time to integrate new technology into the digital classroom. And finally, Hausman recommends collaboration and communication are key. So this is important between stakeholders in the community, whether it's administration to teachers or teachers to students. We all have to work together, and we all have to share what works and what doesn't. And again, it just goes back to supporting people where they need to be supported.
So with all of this, we have suggestions that educators around the world and us as a team have come up with for the COVID-19 distance learning time. So COVID-19 has inevitably shifted the role of distance learning within the world of education. We all know that. It's really clear that the pandemic has had a really devastating impact on the world, and it just continues to devastate. But it's also provided a much needed upgrade to education and teaching and the way that we interact with our students. This opportunity has really allowed us to restructure the classroom and focus less on the traditional academic skills and more on fully developing students' critical thinking and problem-solving skills. It is one thing for students to be able to sit in a classroom, teacher-led, teachers giving out all of the instructions, support, straight there, right there with them, and they can learn from it. It's a whole other thing for the students to be provided with quality educational materials and be able to create their own learning and their own learning experiences from what their teacher has provided to them. It is really imperative, and we've said it before, that that educators receive proper training to effectively transition into that type of distance education. It needs to be founded in theory, research, and practice. Like I believe Raquel mentioned earlier, teachers got 2 days to learn how to create and implement a distance education course for their students. And that's just, it's not enough. People spend years of their lives researching how to be effective as a distance education instructor and still don't reach that goal. So 2 days is really, it's not enough. So we really need to start focusing more on teacher training and support for the teachers. So this big shift into technology also makes it especially important that the students receive the utmost support for a variety of purposes, including but not limited to counselors, nurses, psychologists, and technology support. Providing students with a mere vehicle for learning is not enough. The students must receive support services to assist with the transition to self-discipline and self-motivated learning that is required of distance education. They alone cannot ensure their own success, and that's where the roles of so many other people that work in the education system besides the teacher, that's where they really come into play. Another big thing that we have seen is mental health. It has been extremely focused on since the COVID-19 pandemic, and we really need to provide students, even though they're away and they're not with us every day, as educators, it's our job to monitor how they're doing, what they're feeling. Are they failing because of lack of technology, or are they failing because of some other mental issue that they have going on? So we need to identify that, and we need to be able to support them as best as we can through that, through help with technology, helping their parents with technology, students, families, support staff, administration, and government really must all collaborate to ensure that every learner is receiving the best quality education. It's a team effort. It's not one person with 10 students making something happen. It's a community of people and a community of students that are involved in distance education. So.
Alrighty, well, this is the end of our presentation, and here are our references. We have a couple. So here's our reference slide 1, slide 2, and reference slide 3, and slide 4. We got the references. Thank you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed our presentation. Have a happy Thanksgiving weekend.